Hi, I'm Helen, and this is the Squiggly Careers podcast, where each week we share ideas for action and tools to try out that we hope will help you, and it always helps us navigate squiggly careers with a bit more confidence, clarity, and control. All of our episodes are supported with pod sheets, so it's a one-page summary of some of the things that we talk about, lots of ideas for action, some coach yourself questions to help you to listen and to learn, which is what we really care about. And today, you're not hearing Sarah because she's not with me today. Instead, I've got a guest, so I'm going to be talking to Michael D. Watkins, who is the author of The First 90 Days, a book that I have regularly referred to in the course of my squiggly career. Together in our conversation, we discuss how the first 90 days has changed in work since when he first wrote the book over 20 years ago. We also talk about some of the common transition traps that people fall into when they move from one role to another. We talk about some of the different things that you can do in a job, whether it's your first 90 days in a new job, or maybe you've been in it for quite a while, like what are some of the things we should all be doing quite regularly. And then we talk about if you're starting a new job, you're probably also leaving another. So what are some of the things that you could be doing to leave well? And if you're a manager, we also talk about how you can support people in their first 90 days too. So there's actually quite a lot packed into about a 20-minute conversation. I'd love to know what you think. You can always get in touch with us on social media. There is our Instagram page at AmazingIf. There's also our LinkedIn page, which you can find at AmazingIf, or you can just email us. We're Helen and Sarah at squigglycareers.com. But now let's get on with the conversation. Hi, Michael, and welcome to the Squiggly Careers podcast.
Thank you, Helen. Great to be here.
I'm very excited. I was reflecting on your book and feeling like it was one of the most useful books on my bookshelf. And we love useful, so that kind of feels quite a meaningful things for us. But when I was looking back at my original copy, so this is the new copy, this is the new 10th anniversary edition, my original copy has got pages turned and pen marks all over it. And I've had that for quite a while, but I think you wrote the very first one in 2003, right?
Well, so before I say that, I should tell you I've been tempted sometimes to run a competition for the most beat up copy of the first 90 days, right? It sounds like you've got a contender, right? So if I do it, I'll definitely let you know. So yeah, the book was written originally in 2003. Really briefly, it came out of a previous piece of work I did with a colleague called Right from the Start, which was published way back in 1999. And I tell people I was in my late teens at the time when I was doing this. And then I was doing a whole lot of work with Johnson & Johnson, building programs for them to help new leaders successfully take their roles, right? And it was really out of doing all that work globally with these wonderful leaders that I sort of distilled the tools and the techniques that became the first edition of The First 90 Days. And then, of course, as you mentioned, the second edition, 2012, and I'm actually hard at work on the third edition because, of course, a lot has changed, right, since 2012. Just a little, right?
Just like a little.
Global pandemics, virtual work, a few little bits and pieces like that.
So maybe let's dive into that if it's not giving too much of a sneak peek into the next edition. What do you think has changed about the first 90 days from when you first wrote the book to where we are now with what people are experiencing at work?
Sure. So I think there's a few things I would point to, right? I mean, I joke these days that it's not the first 90 days, it's the first 90 minutes, in some cases, the first 90 seconds, right? But I think one of the things is just the rapidity of change and transition is just accelerated over time. And today, I think it's probably greater than it's ever been. And then, of course, you add the turmoil that we're experiencing, on every dimension possible these days, I think. And so it makes transitions much more relevant, even more relevant than they were when I wrote the book originally. So that speeding up is certainly part of it. The nature of work has changed a great deal, generationally and otherwise. Organizations are far flatter, expectations are far higher. Methodologies of work, whether it's agile, or hybrid work, have really changed the way things have to happen, and they've changed the way that you need to transition into new roles. And then I think transformation has become sort of front and center, I think, for every leader. I mean, I basically tell my classes, my participants in the program I teach at IMD, the Senior Executive Program, that today every leader is a transformational leader. No one's being told everything's fine, just take your time, it's all going to be okay. That's not what's happening these days. And so I think it's a combination of forces like that. At the same time, I think a lot of the basic principles are just flow from humanity and leadership. And, we've had leadership transitions, from the dawn of the species, right? And so there's certain things I think that remain very solid from a kind of principles point of view. And I'll give you a simple example, which is getting early wins, right? The notion that you build credibility early by taking some actions, by connecting with people initially, right? By demonstrating you're credible, but then by having an impact on the organization that really begin to create momentum. And if you don't create momentum, or even worse, you create anti-momentum, you're in desperate trouble, right? So it's kind of this, yes, things have changed, technology, work, transformation, speed, but there's also things that I think remain very consistent and solid over time.
And I think sort of reflecting on my own experience, when I first got your book, I would have been in, I don't know which organisation, it might have been Eon or something like that. So large organisation. And I remember the onboarding process at that time, it sort of felt a bit more supported. So yes, it was about me and my career, but there was a little bit more sort of around me. Whereas more recently, when I started in big companies, because everything is changing so fast and everyone's working in a different way, it's sort of been you're here, great, get started. And some of the luxury of 90 days from what the company provides, I don't feel was there as much as it was in my early career, which is why I think your book actually becomes more important in today's context, because it's more relevant for you to take control of it.
No, so I agree with you, right? And I think that there's both the speed and turbulence going on. There's also that companies don't really have the same kind of social contract with their employees that they used to, right? You're assuming your employees are only going to stay a relatively short period of time. Why would you invest a lot in them, right? And that's true not just for onboarding, but more generally for developing people, right? So I think it's a product of some of those forces that we're seeing. I still believe onboarding is very important. There really wasn't such a thing as onboarding when I started working in transitions, right? I'm not saying I created onboarding, but I certainly made a contribution to it. Today, we're dealing with, as you said, different things like how do we onboard people virtually into new organizations and how that's different. And I actually just had an article come out a couple of days ago about that very topic. So.
One of the things that really resonated with me in the book is the transition traps, and not just because I like alliteration, which I do, but I think because I identified with quite a few of them. There was one in particular, like the action imperative, like I'm here, what can I do? Because if I do stuff, then it looks like I'm doing a good job. And, like that sort of trying to do before you learn what needs to do and how to do it around here. And I wondered whether you could share with us some common pitfalls that you see people making in that first 90-day period.
Yeah, I sometimes joke that people treat this like it's a checklist of prior experience, like, oh yeah, I fell into that one there, and ooh, that one really hurt, kind of thing, right? So I've boiled it down a little bit more for the next edition of the book, Helen, into sort of, I think, 4 big traps, right? Number one, and I see it unfortunately happen all the time, which is sticking with what you know, right? Thinking you're going to be successful in your new role, doing the same things you did in previous roles. And this sort of, connects to Marshall Goldsmith's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And the reality is that in most cases, you've got to embrace new possibilities, new imperatives when you take a role. Second one is the one you mentioned, which is really an important one. That pressure you feel early on to take action, to show people that they made the right decision in hiring or promoting you. So you try too hard, you try too early. And that's the one, as you noted, I call it the action imperative. And then the third is just not focusing on learning the right things, right? Focusing too much on the technical learning, I describe it, and not enough on the politics and culture of the organization. Particularly dangerous when you're, when you're joining a new organization. And the fourth one, and this, I think is less the case than it used to be because organizations are flatter, but not building pure relationships early enough, right? Focusing too much on the vertical, as it were, and not enough on the horizontal. So, I used to have 7, then I had 5, now I have 4. I'd like to believe that, distillation and precision are informing all this.
In year 30, there'll be 3. I thought the relationship one was really interesting as well. Again, you read into a book what resonates with you, doesn't it? But I think that often I can see that sort of supporting my team and connecting with my manager taking precedence around quite a lot of the other enabling relationships in the other functions, and the time without thinking about it, the time it directly goes to my team. But when I'm more conscious, I build that bigger community in the company. And I think the book for me just raises a lot of consciousness. I also have so many memories of reading your book on a beach. Like, weirdly, I think before I would start a new job, I would often have a holiday. You know, it's always a good time, isn't it, to have a holiday before you start a new job. So your book would often be beach reading. And I remember going through some of that stuff in advance before I started the first 90 days and having that in my mind.
Well, and it's interesting to connect to sort of current developments too, Helen, right? Which is, the fact that so many people are now working virtually or hybrid, remotely or hybrid, it actually makes building those lateral relationships even harder. And you've got to be even more kind of purposeful in doing it, right? Because you don't naturally just run into people or connect with them other than perhaps informal team meetings that you're in. So, being even more disciplined in doing that work of connecting out laterally into key stakeholders is just really essential.
And so on a recent reread, how many years am I into my job now? So I'm kind of co-founder of Amazing If and officially the CEO, though sometimes I wonder what that actually means. But I've been doing this now full time for about 4 years. And I was rereading, so definitely not in the first 90 days, but I was rereading your book thinking, well, yes, it is. Lots of this is very relevant for the first 90 days, but actually lots of this is very relevant for me right now. And I wondered, in terms of the activities and exercises that you recommend in the book, are there any that you think people should do repeatedly, regardless of whether in your first 90 days or, the first 9 months or even beyond that?
Well, it's interesting you say that because I do see folks kind of picking it up almost like a methodology they use on an ongoing basis, right? Every 90 days, pick up certain pieces of it. I think it connects to with some of the work that's happened out of Agile with sprints, right? So you can think about each 90 days of your work as a kind of a sprint, right? And I think, the logic of this is kind of, diagnose the situation, learn and connect, define your plan, right? So diagnose, define, deliver, right, is kind of the logic of the cycle. And that's something you can apply on an ongoing basis, right? I think there's real value in sort of organizing yourself in a cyclical way. Now, obviously, there's always disruptions and things you need to connect with. So no, absolutely, you can do that. And I'm actually seeing more organizations sort of approach transformation in a similar cyclical way, right? It's not something we do periodically. I mean, we used to talk about unfreezing organizations and transforming them and freezing them again. I mean, wow, we would never use language like that today, right? It's a much more continual process. And if you embrace that idea, then you think about, well, there's an ongoing cycle of transformation. So maybe there's an opportunity for the next 90 days.
Yeah.
Be the approach, for sure.
I think one of the things that myself and Sarah learned when we started our business was we focused on the individual. So we were all about helping individuals to develop the squiggly skills. And then honestly, about 18 months, 2 years into it, so it wasn't an immediate discovery, these people would come back to us and they would say, I loved your course, learned a lot from it, but I had a bit of an issue when I had a career conversation with my manager because they didn't know how to talk to me about my confidence gremlins or my career possibilities. And so you really need to support managers in sync with individuals. And we were like, oh yeah, we if we want to change career cultures, we probably need to get both of those things. And so thankfully, we have now done that, and that's what we work on quite a lot. But I did wonder, from your perspective, what you thought managers should be doing to support people in their first 90 days if individuals are taking all of this ownership.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that, because when I wrote the second edition, I have a chapter at the end, which I swear no one ever gets to or reads, right, called Organizational Implications, right, accelerating everybody. And the basic logic is exactly what you said, right? I mean, I'm a huge believer that there is power in having common frameworks, common languages, common toolkits for organizations, right? Because it becomes part of the ongoing conversation that you can have. And certainly we went through a similar evolution of kind of focusing on individual leaders taking new roles. But, my consulting company basically now works with organizations to institutionalize the first 90 days as a common framework language toolkit. And once you do that, you begin to get these sort of synergies of being able to have conversations using that language. And the way I describe it too is that if you can accelerate everyone's transition by 10% in an organization, that's an enormous amount of value creation that goes on. So my experience is very much track what you've experienced.
And so if I was a manager, we're recruiting at the moment. So we've got a couple of people joining the team, which I'm really excited about. If you were to tell me sort of one or two things, we're going to tease out that last chapter, that I could be doing to help them in their first 90 days, be at their best, and then beyond those 90 days, can you give me your words of wisdom? Also for people listening, but mainly for me.
Sure. So I think there's a few things I'd point to, right? First of all, you want to welcome your new people, right? You want them to feel as quickly as possible that you care, that you're connecting. Those early interactions are their first taste of you as an organization, right? And so they need to be welcoming at a fundamental level. And then the foundations of successful transitions, I think, are learning and connecting. And there's lots you can do to help both of those processes. You can help someone get up the learning curve even before they're formally in the role or on the job. There's a lot you can do to help them connect, right? So, and it can be as simple as, here are the 10 people you need to talk to, and here's why, right? And send a little note to each one of them, Helen's joining the organization, here's her role, here's some ways you might be able to help her, right? Just really simple stuff like that can really, help accelerate the transition of someone joining the organization. And you have a big stake in making that happen, right? I mean, the faster they get up to speed and become fully productive, the better off you are. It's never occurred to me why that isn't like blindingly obvious to people, right? But people are busy, right? And so the notion of investing in onboarding someone, it's not obvious that that's the way you're going to spend your time, even though the payoff is potentially huge. I guess welcoming them into the team, right? Helping them connect with the team is a key piece. Being crystal clear about expectations early and where they might be able to get some really wins would be valuable. Coaching them a bit as they come in. So it very much mirrors the structure of the first 90 days, but it's more how you help someone else do that work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I've taken away sort of the team connections, maybe introductions outside of the team that might be not so obvious and easy without me making that happen for them. And then really focusing on those early wins for them to give them, I guess, a sense of achievement as well, so that they're not doing action for action's sake, but it's action that's in support.
They're building their confidence. I like the gremlins, by the way. I noted that one in passing, and confidence gremlins. And so helping people get a sense that they're contributing, connecting. People want to feel competent. They want to feel like they're achieving things, right? And the more you can do to help that process, I think the better.
So I was thinking that when you start a new role, so you're in your first 90 days, you'll have left another one. And we had a podcast a while ago on how to leave well. And I wondered if you had any advice for, if you're starting a new role, you're also leaving another one. So what are some of the really great things that we should look to do as we're leaving, as well as sort of starting those first 90 days in a new role?
Yeah. So it's funny you say this, because actually some colleagues and I co-authored an HB article, early part of the year, I guess it was, about how to quit when you're leading a team, right? Which is exactly about this, right? And it kind of flows from the observation I think you just made, which is it's important for a variety of reasons to wrap things up and depart well. Part of it's just your responsibility to help your team and the next leader be positioned for success. And part of it's frankly about your reputation, right? And not closing doors that you don't want to close. And I mean, some of it's just obvious, right? Don't leave things undone that it's best for you to be doing, right? Don't leave to your successor, hard choices that you should be making, right? But at the same time, don't make choices that your successor should be making. Again, pretty similar principles. Help them up the learning curve, right? Help your team deal with the reality of transition and what's going on. I mean, none of this is rocket science, obviously, right? But it's surprising always how few people do a good job of it. And personally, I think too, that's because organizations don't help when they kind of expect you to continue to do one job, completely wrapping it up, overlapping with doing the new one. And then that kind of, doesn't do justice to the job you're coming out of, and it doesn't really help you focus on the job you're going into. And I'm hugely not a fan of that happening, but it does happen.
I always find it useful, we talk about sort of quick wins when you start roles, almost like closing wins. So because, when towards the end of your role, you're sort of hopefully handing over some of your responsibilities, and maybe you've got a slightly different perspective and headspace, maybe a bit more time in your diary because you don't need to be dragged into every meeting. And I think that's a really nice time that you can find a few closing wins that you could, just a few things that you could do, like templates or documents, or, run a meeting, but it's a very different agenda. And I think it helps other people to go like, wow, they're really good. And so they're going to more likely to recommend you in the future, and you're probably going to meet them again in your squiggly career. But it also makes you feel good so that you go into your next role not feeling a bit flat about what you've left, but feeling really brilliant about what you bring. And I just think it's so important for them and for you to leave well.
100% agree with you, right? And yeah, no, I mean, part of it is just for you. When I coach people more on kind of long-term career bases, right? Legacy is important, right? What do you want your legacy to have been from this particular period of time in your life, right? And how are you making sure you're kind of cementing that set of accomplishments? It's really important. And it helps you, as I think you just said, to kind of make then the positive move forward, right?
And we often talk about, when you're looking at opportunities as well, sort of working your weak ties. So there'll be points of time in your career when you'll want to go back to some of those people and ask them for an intro or their advice. And that is so much easier to do when you've left a job well.
Look, people have long memories about these things, right? And if you've burned bridges on your way out, or very obviously, not helped support the organization going through a big transition, that's not going to be someone you're going to go back to, or a group of people you're going to go back to later on. 100% agree with you.
So my final question, and we ask all of our kind of experts that come onto the podcast this, is your best piece of career advice. And it can be something that someone has gifted to you, or something that you have just sort of found useful for yourself over your career.
Yep. When I talk to people about this, I talk about starting where you are and looking forward, but also looking forward and working backward. And what I mean by that is, when I do this kind of work, right, I try to define a specific period of time, an era of time, 2-3 years, whatever it is, and say two questions, right? What do you want to be true about what you've accomplished at the end of that period? And what do you want to be possible as a result of what you've done during that period, right? And so, because there's a tendency to say, okay, I'm here, I kind of want to go there, is also highly valuable to say, once I'm there, right, what do I want to be true? What do I want to be possible? And working both ends of that equation, I think, is really quite helpful.
I love that. Sometimes we ask people, what do you want to be true in 12 months' time that isn't true today? But I feel that and what will be possible because of it is a really important build that helps you go beyond that 12-month point.
Well, because it also focuses you on what are the options you want to create, the possibilities you want to explore, the competencies you want to build that may then prepare you for that next era, right, in your career.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing it. And thank you for spending your time with us. As I said, massive fan of your book. And I know that lots of other people are going to be listening and going to go out and look at it as well. So maybe they can get it now and then get the updated edition very soon as well. We're going to run a competition so people will be able to get hold of a copy as well. But thank you very much for your time, Michael.
Thank you, Helen. Great to talk.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you picked up a few tips and tactics, and good luck. If you're about to start your first 90 days in a new job, good luck. It always feels a bit hard, and sometimes I think it's a bit of a trigger for confidence gremlins. So it might be worth looking at the free ebook we've got on how to cage your confidence gremlins, which is on our website. If you just go to amazingif.com, on the top it'll say learn with us, the top toolbar, and then you'll find loads of free career resources, such as the How to Cage Your Confidence Gremlin ebook. There's the A to Z of Squiggly Careers. There's the pod book we created, which has got over 100 pod sheets in it. There's loads, everybody, loads and loads of free resources. But I think the confidence one in particular could be a good one if you're about to start a new role. So you can start with brilliant levels of self-belief. So thank you so much for listening. We'll be back with another episode next week.